The call came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of afternoon that feels forgettable, even as it is happening. The sky was pale, the air still, and Toan was standing by the window when his phone rang. He almost ignored it. Life had taught him to expect nothing, to protect himself with silence. But the moment he heard the trembling voice on the other end, something inside him cracked. "Your mother has been arrested." The words fell heavily, like stones sinking into water. Toan's breath caught. He did not understand why his chest tightened so painfully, why his hands began to shake. His memories were supposed to be empty, blurred, broken, safely locked away. And yet at that instant, a deep unease spread through him, as if his heart recognized the truth before his mind could. Images flickered without warning. A woman's back in a dim hallway, the echo of raised voices, cold metal handcuffs reflecting harsh light. None of it was clear, but all of it felt familiar. Toan pressed his palm against his chest, trying to steady himself. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, as though the past had returned to claim its space. He sat down slowly, staring at the floor. Outside, people continued their lives, vendors calling out, motorbikes passing, laughter drifting from somewhere far away. The world did not stop, even though his had just tilted on its axis. It reminded him of how life often works. Tragedy arrives quietly, while everyone else keeps moving. Guilt crept in next, uninvited and unexplained. He felt as though he had abandoned something important, someone he should have protected. The name Mother echoed in his thoughts, heavy with responsibility and unresolved pain. Why did it hurt this much if he barely remembered her? Why did fear twist so tightly around his heart? As night fell, sleep refused to come. When it finally did, it was restless and cruel. Toan dreamed of rain-soaked streets and a woman crying his name, his real name. He woke with damp eyes and a pounding heart, haunted by a feeling he could not name. Somewhere deep inside, buried beneath forgotten years and fractured memories, a door had begun to open, and once opened, it would not close again. The days after the arrest passed in a strange, uneven rhythm. Sometimes time dragged so slowly that Toan could hear his own thoughts echo. Other moments slipped by without warning, as if someone had torn pages out of his life. He tried to return to routine, simple meals, short walks, quiet evenings, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. The silence inside him had been disturbed, and it refused to settle. It began with small things. A siren in the distance made his shoulders tense. The clink of metal, keys, chains, even a spoon against a bowl, sent a sharp pulse through his head. He would stop mid-step, breath shallow, eyes unfocused, as though the world had briefly shifted out of place. People around him noticed. They asked if he was tired, if he needed rest. He smiled and nodded, choosing the easier answer. At night, the memories grew bolder. Toan dreamed of standing outside a police station, rain soaking through his clothes. He could feel the cold on his skin, smell wet asphalt, hear his own voice shouting, but the words dissolved before he could understand them. Each time he woke, his heart was racing, his pillow damp with sweat. The dreams did not explain anything, yet they left him aching, as though he had lived through something unbearable and unfinished. During the day, he caught his reflection in shop windows and mirrors. Sometimes he did not recognize the man staring back. Other times, the familiarity was unsettling. He wondered who he had been before forgetting, what kind of son, what kind of man. The thought that he might have failed someone weighed heavily on him, even without proof. And then there was the emptiness shaped like a person. It happened on a morning that looked no different from the others. The street below hummed with life. Coffee cups clinked, voices overlapped, footsteps rushed past one another. Toan was standing at a small newsstand when he saw it. A printed photo, slightly faded at the edges, taped unevenly to a pole. Missing person. His eyes stopped there, as if guided by something deeper than sight. He did not know why his heart suddenly began to pound. He stepped closer, ignoring the curious glance of the vendor, and stared at the image. The woman in the photo was smiling softly, her eyes gentle but strong, as though she carried both pain and hope within them. And then the name beneath the picture pierced through him. Tu Diem. He whispered it without realizing, the syllables falling from his lips like a confession. The moment he spoke her name, a sharp ache bloomed in his chest, warm and unbearable at the same time. His vision blurred. He clutched the edge of the stand to steady himself, breath shallow, pulse racing. He did not remember her face in detail. He did not remember where they met or how their story began, but his body remembered what his mind could not. His heart reacted with a certainty that frightened him. This was not curiosity. This was loss. Fragments crashed into him, hands intertwined on a crowded sidewalk, shared silence in a dim room, the sound of someone calling his name in worry, not anger. Each memory came without context, like pages torn from a book, but the emotions were whole and devastating. Far away, Tu Diem felt it too. She was folding laundry when her hands suddenly stilled. A strange chill passed through her, followed by an overwhelming sadness she could not explain. The name Toan surfaced in her thoughts, uninvited and heavy. She sat down slowly, pressing a hand to her chest, wondering why her heart felt as though it had been tugged by an invisible thread. Back at the street corner, Toan stepped away from the photo, shaken. He told himself it was coincidence, that grief and guilt were playing tricks on him. Yet even as he turned to leave, his gaze kept drifting back, unwilling to let go. That night, he dreamed of her face more clearly than ever before. When he woke, her name was still on his lips. Tu Diem. For the first time since losing his memories, Toan understood one truth with terrifying clarity. Forgetting had not erased love. And now that his heart had remembered, it would not allow him to remain still. Some choices announce themselves loudly. Others arrive quietly, settling in the heart long before the mind dares to follow. Toan stood at the bus station before dawn, the city still half asleep. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and dust, and somewhere a vendor was arranging bread for the morning rush. Life, in all its ordinary persistence, continued around him. And yet, for Toan, everything felt suspended between who he had been and who he was becoming. He did not remember everything. Large pieces of his past were still missing, scattered like broken glass across forgotten years. But one thing had become painfully clear. Staying where he was meant choosing comfort over truth. The thought of Tu Diem, her name, her face from the photograph, the ache she left behind, followed him relentlessly. It lived in his chest, in his dreams, in the quiet moments when he tried to convince himself to move on. As the bus arrived, he hesitated. What if he remembered too much? What if the truth hurt more than forgetting ever had? He thought of his mother, sitting alone in a holding cell, and the memories that had begun to surface because of her fall. He thought of the man he used to be, strong, confident, certain, and the man he had become, fragile yet honest in his confusion. Somewhere between those two versions of himself, a promise had been made. And promises, even forgotten ones, have a way of demanding to be kept. Tu Diem, miles away, was waiting without knowing she was waiting. She went through her days with practiced strength, smiling when she had to, crying only when no one could see. Hope had become a quiet companion, wounded but stubborn. She told herself not to expect miracles, yet her heart still listened for footsteps that never came. The bus doors opened with a soft hiss. Toan stepped forward. As the city slowly slipped past the window, he closed his eyes. He did not ask for all his memories back. He asked only for courage. The courage to face the woman his heart refused to forget. The courage to accept whatever truth awaited him. Fate had already begun its work. The arrest, the memories, the photograph. None of it was accidental. Whether or not Toan would remember everything no longer mattered as much as this. He was finally returning. And sometimes love does not need a complete past, only a willing heart and the bravery to come home.